Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Anderson. I'm the Director of Programming here at the Kingston Canadian Film Festival. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our guest for this session, Kyle Armstrong, who is the writer and director of Hands That Bind, which is something we're very excited to have in the KCFF lineup this year. So thanks, Kyle, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
If you've just viewed the film and are joining us, welcome. We hope you enjoyed it. And if not, be sure to check out our digital platform to get a ticket. And yeah, this is something I think is really, it's a really unique piece that I'm really excited to have at the festival, just because it is, it's in a dark and disquieting mode that I always appreciate. and I will, although I'm sure, like, as the creator of something, and well, maybe something that's kind of hard to live in that space for as long as it takes to get a feature film made, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's quite an endeavor to put together these things, especially when you cobble them together piece by piece with limited funds. So yeah, we're very happy to be part of the festival.
Well, that's great, and this is, I mean, again, this has been, a really, I'm really, it is such a really accomplished piece, and I think it's really, just sort of tonally and thematically, I think really strong, and really does create a vibe that I really appreciate, and definitely something that kind of unnerves, maybe is meant to unnerve viewers, but at the same time engage them, and kind of keep them in this sort of strange space. But it's but I think it's like, I mean, certainly, like, would you, I mean, just for the beginning, I'll probably get more into the sort of tonal questions later, but just for the beginning, like, how did this story begin for you? How did the project begin?
Oh, it's many years ago. I grew up on a farm in southern Alberta. And so this is kind of me trying to retrace some of my roots and tell a bit of the stories that I knew growing up. And there's probably, I feel like there's a lot of stigma or stereotype revolving around farm people, rural culture. And I wanted to tell a story from that region that had a lot more depth to it, that showed some depth to the people and to the situations that people experience there. And then to not gloss over some of the maybe shortcomings that we see in the culture as well.
That's it. I was thinking about that kind of, I mean, I grew up in Calgary, and I had plenty of ranching folk in my family, and that's it. I've definitely sort of connected with on that level. But I just think about that, especially even at time. I mean, you do remember that thinking about the real despair and desolation that can exist in this kind of context in rural communities, and just the kind of, like, I mean, just I mean, that's I mean, especially having my family in Saskatchewan, thinking about the experience of really intense isolation as a kind of as a daily thing. And
Yeah.
that's something that we kind of, especially as people in more urban settings. So that's that real kind of, I mean, I think that really captures, the film really captures it. Just like, you're out there on your own a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that sort of a feeling from when you were younger, that you're kind of like that kind of, this is whatever's going to go down, it really is just me here in the dark or in the middle of the field or wherever?
Yeah, absolutely. Our closest neighbors were 2 miles away, and then the next closest neighbors were probably 5 miles away.
Wow.
And looking west from our place, we could see a good 20 miles. Uh, and there was nothing between us and the horizon that we could see there. So, I mean, it's a pretty vast expanse of dry, arid, not great farmland for sure. I mean, this is the heart of the Palliser Triangle. Palliser Triangle, of course, being kind of an infamous place of really dry, uninhabitable kind of region. But this particular part of it was so bad that the Alberta government I'll get the dates wrong, but probably I think in the 30s designated it kind of to have special designation. It's actually called the special areas instead of a municipality that we're traditionally used to. So yeah.
And that's it. You really get a sense that this is hard land that these people are trying to work, and the toll this takes on the families is obvious. Like, it's, and this is, I mean, even if the story does take sort of a maybe more ambiguous, I mean, certainly all kinds of sort of strange things at the periphery, but at the heart of it, I think it is really effective. It's sort of showing what kind of being in this space and trying to do this kind of work there, what kind of toll that can take.
Yeah, after a while, I started thinking of the landscape as a character in the film in some ways. And the cinematographer Mike McLaughlin and I talked about this quite often, is those landscapes, there's nothing quite like it that either of us have experienced, just how desolate it can be. And it sort of kind of takes on, like it's another person in the film, it feels like to me.
And how did you kind of come to sort of develop the story of Paul Sparks' character? This kind of I mean, obviously that, I mean, it's already, I mean, it's hard enough sort of economic for people who actually might own a piece of this sort of, but then to have him as somebody who is really at the mercy of these sort of larger forces, as someone who's kind of sort of economically dispossessed as well.
Yeah, I mean, how I see him is he's a man who is facing a changing world, and he either has to adapt to it or not. And so, for those of you that saw the film, you know where that went. And it's, to me, it's a really present story in that way. You know, you've got this rural white male seeing a world that's changing around him, and you know, he's got to choose whether he's going to make changes in his life to further understand the world, or to sort of retreat. And yeah, to me it's a really present story for us, and one that I think we should be talking about.
I think that's, and yeah, and just in terms of even that, like, yeah, and certainly there are those notes about what it means in that kind of in terms of its masculinity, you know, especially in a kind of community and context where it means, I mean, being a certain kind of man is a lot of pressure, and I think that's certainly something that kind of comes clear, that a lot of the behaviors or decisions that are being made here are impacted by that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this changing world, it doesn't just revolve around his wife wanting to go back to work or him losing his job. It's some of the other elements in the world that he's experiencing that are a little bit ununderstandable to us as well. So, so yeah, I wanted to include the audience in his feeling of bewilderment sometimes, and I hope that triggers the right response, or a response. I'll be happy with any response.
That's true. And it was funny. I mean, thinking about this particular era, because the film people seen is sort of set in the early '80s. And one thing that sort of, I mean, it does sort of start to figure into it pretty early in the film. So I think we talk about, I mean, cattle mutilation. I mean, that was just such a strange phenomenon of that, and that really is associated with that era. And it's kind of like going back to like the '80s and thinking about the satanic panic with daycares and schools and small communities. And there was a kind of you know, paranormal occultism just at the periphery that we kind of forget about, or we've kind of just, or it just seems like it's like, no, people were really weirded out, and there was this stuff that was happening that people could not explain.
Absolutely, there are things that happen that we don't understand. So how do we what do we do when we confront that in our life, you know?
Was it, I mean, was it surprising? I mean, that kind of, you know, the sort of more, I mean, it sure doesn't sort of tip over into sort of horror film, but certainly stuff that is more visceral. I mean, was that kind of always part of this script for you, or did that sort of kind of creep into it somehow when you started to get into like, oh yeah, there are these sort of you know, more unexplained elements that can kind of be part of this piece?
Yeah, I really did want to have an unsettled feel to the film, and I really wanted to show things that feel unusual or out of the ordinary, especially in a scenario that, as we described, is very it's very quiet, very isolated, sort of middle of nowhere when things happen, and you're kind of left looking around wondering, did anyone notice that, or was I the only one that saw that? And I wanted to have that as part of the film.
It's also, I've been, you know, reading about the film too, and it's certainly a phrase that pops up in descriptions of the film, is the prairie gothic. And I'm like, oh yes, and it is sort of, it's one of those things, you know, when you see it, it's like, oh, but it is sort of, I mean, was that sort of part of your thinking about the film at all?
Yeah, for sure, because I get tired of I feel like there's two tropes sort of for rural culture in film. One is sort of our heartland romantic idealization of it, and the other is to show rural people as a bunch of redneck hillbillies that don't know anything. And so I wanted something much more complex than that. And yeah, that's definitely a big part of why I wanted to write this film the way I did.
And I was also thinking about Jim Thompson as a sort of, because this sort of feels like this sort of settings that he liked for a lot of his stories, and this sort of that kind of thing, which made a big impact, of course, in the Coen brothers films. Like that kind of, there is that desolate, I mean, that sort of shows up again in No Country for Old Men or films like that, where it's like there's that kind of that using this kind of landscape as space for a sort of a real raw evil, and that's it, really somehow kind of comes from the space too.
That's right. That's right. And I'll gladly take any No Country or Blood Simple or any of those kind of references. I'll take them and put them as a badge. I actually just interrupted myself watching Barton Fink to come up here to do this interview, and because I'm struggling with my writing these days. but yeah, I'll gladly take those comparisons, and I think too about how this land was inhabited by people that lived here for thousands of years, and how they were displaced, and how that, I think it shows up very early on in the film and sort of is repeated a few times throughout. Sort of this idea that the people that are there, they feel a strong sense of ownership over their land, over this place that they live. But it's sort of an absurd notion to begin with, and there's kind of a darkness to all of that, to the very origin and genesis of some of our farming roots. And I'm not suggesting that there's any ill intent, but sometimes our haphazard kind of retelling of history allows us to skirt around things that are quite dark, and I feel like that kind of lonely, uninhabited place, it really is a place to explore sort of darker themes. And I feel like we don't see it enough, and I want to see it more. And so I figured, maybe I should do it.
Maybe I should do it. Maybe I should spend many years trying to get this off the ground, which is, it's certainly a testament to your tenacity to get the film finished, and I'm really happy you did. And I guess, I mean, obviously the actors are a big part of that process too. And you could talk about, I mean, Paul Sparks is he's somebody people may recognize from different TV shows. I mean, it's one of those, like, I was just thinking about that with another film, actually, Jockey with Clifton Collins Jr., another kind of actor where it's just been kind of killing it again and again in sort of secondary roles, and to see this sort of actor as a lead, and you're like, wow, this, there's so much, such a magnetic and such depth.
Absolutely. And I feel like his performance elevates everyone else around him too. I feel like that's what you get with a good lead, is someone who will bring everyone else rise, like, I guess, prompt or instill something in the other performances that does sort of elevate everyone together. And Paul is a wonderful human being and a really great actor, and I'm so glad he said yes to doing this film. And yeah, I hope people get to see this film, because I feel oftentimes like he put the whole film on his shoulders and just carries it through the entire thing. I think he's in 90% of the film, so that's a lot of days. And he was shooting a show in Boston at the same time called Castle. Wow. So he would get 2 days off. They would fly in from Calgary to Boston to work with Tim Robbins and whoever else for about 8-10 hours, maybe 16, I don't know. And then they would fly him back. So in a 2-day period off, he would be back in Boston working, and then they'd fly him back to Canada, in Western Canada here, to shoot it. So.
Oh my God, he must be, guys, I hope he got to sleep on the plane at least.
He's driven, and he's very, very easy to work with too.
And I have to ask too, like, what it was like to be with Bruce Dern, who's obviously a living legend, and as he's seen some things, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was pretty trippy. Bruce is Bruce, and I mean, he's a screen legend. And you sit down and talk to him, and you realize, oh, okay, he worked with Hitchcock and Tarantino, and the list goes on and on and on of the people he's worked with. And here he is coming to shoot my film, and I love his performance in this movie. So I'm really happy he said yes as well, and we had a great time with Bruce, and I'm really proud that he's a part of it.
That's a terrific. I mean, it definitely, it's one of those things where you realize like it doesn't, you bring someone like that into the texture of a film, and it's all kinds of things happen that are really great. And by the same token, I'm always happy to see Will Oldham as a, I mean, I think like, not just for the music, but like Old Joy was one of my favorite films that ever, and I think that he's just always somebody who's, and he shows up here as this sort of, bartender whose wisdom maybe is not the best wisdom, but
That's an interesting take on that.
yeah.
Yeah, this is my third time working with Will, and I really like him as a human being, and I really like him as a performer. I mean, he's one of my favorite performers, and a fantastic conversationalist. So always great to spend time with him for sure.
Well, it's great, and it's that's the thing is like I said, I think like something I really appreciate about films is just like are the company you get to sort of spend time with within the sort of context of a film. I mean, whether making it or viewing it, it's just to be, and it's no small thing to kind of enjoy people's company, no matter kind of who no matter how creepy their characters may be.
Honestly, the crew and the cast and producer Blake McWilliam and the people on this film, they all were there because they wanted to be a part of it and they wanted to make this movie. Everyone seemed to really love the script and connect with it and identify with it. And Susan Kent is just phenomenal in this movie, and I can't wait for people to see her more and more. And I hope that people see this film for her. Landon Liberon, Nicholas Campbell, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Campbell. It's just a really fun group of people, cinematographers, production designers, everyone kind of willing to pitch in, and a lot of farmers willing to pitch in and give up their time and loan us a piece of equipment. Or you want to put a cow in a tree? Sure, go ahead. We'll figure that out. You want to light it on fire? Well, maybe we can do that. And so we ended up actually shooting the film in the community where I did grow up too, which is really, really special to me because I tried to location scout someplace closer to my hometown here of Edmonton, where I live now. And I just couldn't find a place that felt right. And eventually the producer just said, you know what, I think you got to shoot this right where you grew up. So, some of those scenes we shot in the exact spot in my mind that I wrote that.
Wow.
And that's a really unique chance to be able to do that. So
that's amazing. It's an opportunity for genuine time travel, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a very interesting experience, and I'm so grateful to the community for how supportive they were, for sure.
Well, that's amazing. Well, really, I'm so thrilled to have the film at the festival here, and really hoping that and get some more eyes on it, because it's a really really unique piece, and I think even if they'll it might get under their skin, but I think that it's not an unpleasant experience.
Good. I mean, I like reactions, whether the reaction is negative or positive. If it does something inside for people, then I feel like I've done my job. If they walk away with something to think about, then I feel like I've done my job. And so liking, disliking, wherever people fall on that spectrum is entirely fine by me. So I just appreciate the people taking the time to actually sit down and watch it for 2 hours.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much to Kyle for joining us, and thanks to everyone watching, and I hope you get to see more at the festival, which runs from March 3rd to 13th. And we got plenty of other great people talking to us in these sessions, but I really do encourage people who haven't seen it to see Hands Up Line. So thanks again, Kyle.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.